Laws by Plato. Chapter 1: The Foundation of Laws. Introduction. In the opening chapter of Plato's Laws, we embark on a philosophical journey that delves into the very essence of justice and governance. Picture a world where the foundations of society hang in the balance, where questions of ethics and the role of law become the stage for an intellectual battle. Amidst a riveting dialogue, we witness the protagonists grapple with profound inquiries. What is the nature of justice? How can we construct a just society? And, perhaps most intriguing of all, can humanity ever truly find harmony in the realm of law? As the narrative unfolds, the foundation of law leaves us on the precipice of an exploration into the very core of human civilization. It's a tantalizing invitation into a world of ideas that will challenge your preconceptions and ignite your curiosity about the nature of law and its impact on our lives. Persons of the dialogue: an Athenian stranger, Cleinias; a Cretan, Megillus; a Lacedaemonian.
Tell me, strangers, is a god or some man supposed to be the author of your laws?
A god, stranger, in truth, a god. Among us Cretans, he is said to have been Zeus, but in Lacedaemon, where our friend here comes from, I believe they would say that Apollo is their lawgiver. Isn't that right, Megillus?
Certainly.
And do you, Cleinias, believe, as Homer tells, that every 9th year Minos went to converse with his Olympian father and was inspired by him to make laws for your cities?
Yes, that is our tradition, and there was Rhadamanthus, his brother, whose name with which you are familiar. He is reputed to have been the most just of men, and we Cretans believe that he earned this reputation from his righteous administration of justice when he was alive.
Yes, and it was a noble reputation, worthy of a son of Zeus. Since you and Megillus have been trained in these institutions, I assume that you will not be unwilling to give an account of your government and laws. We can pass the time pleasantly by talking about them on our way, as I am told that the distance from Knossos to the cave and temple of Zeus is considerable. Undoubtedly, there are shady places under the tall trees that will protect us from the scorching sun. Since we are no longer young, we can often stop to rest beneath them and complete the whole journey without difficulty, engaging in conversation to pass the time.
Yes, stranger, and if we continue onward, we will come across groves of cypresses, which are exceptionally tall and beautiful. There are also green meadows where we can rest and converse.
Very good.
Very good indeed, and even better when we see them. Let us move on cheerfully.
I am willing. And first, I want to know why the law has ordained that you should have communal meals, engage in physical exercises, and carry weapons.
I think, stranger, that the purpose of our institutions is easily understandable to anyone. Look at the nature of our country. Crete is not like Thessaly, a large plain. For this reason, they have horsemen in Thessaly, and we have runners. The uneven terrain in our country is more suited for traveling on foot. But if you have runners, you must have light weapons. No one can carry a heavy weight while running, and bows and arrows are convenient because they are light. All these regulations have been made with a view to war, and the legislator seems to have considered this in all his arrangements. The communal meals, if I am not mistaken, were instituted for a similar reason. He saw that while the citizens are in the field, they are compelled by the nature of the situation to have their meals together for mutual protection. He has thought that the world is foolish in not understanding that all men are always at war with one another. If in war there ought to be communal meals and certain individuals regularly appointed to protect an army, then they should continue in times of peace. What men term peace would be considered by him to be only a name. Every city is in a natural state of war with every other, not proclaimed by heralds, but everlasting. And if you look closely, you will find that this was the intention of the Cretan legislator. All institutions, both private and public, were arranged by him with a view to war. In giving them, he was under the impression that no possessions or institutions are of any value to someone who is defeated in battle, as all the good things of the conquered pass into the hands of the conquerors.
You appear to me, stranger, to have been thoroughly trained in the Cretan institutions and to be well informed about them. Will you tell me more explicitly what principle of government you would lay down? It seems to me that you imagine a well-governed state should be ordered in a way that it can conquer all other states in war. Am I right in supposing this to be your meaning?
Certainly, and our Lacedaemonian friend, if I am not mistaken, will agree with me.
Why, my good friend, how could any Lacedaemonian say anything else?
And does what you say apply only to states or also to villages?
It applies to both alike.
The case is the same?
Yes.
And in the village, will there be the same war of family against family and individual against individual?
The same.
And should each man conceive himself to be his own enemy, what shall we say?
Oh, Athenian stranger, I will not call you an inhabitant of Attica, for you seem to deserve to be named after the goddess herself. You have shed light on the argument and will now better understand what I was just saying. All men are publicly each other's enemies, and each man privately his own.
Let us now reverse the order of the argument. Seeing that every individual is either his own superior or his own inferior, may we say that the same principle applies in the house, the village, and the state?
Do you mean that in each of them there is a principle of superiority or inferiority to self?
Yes.
You are right to ask this question, as there is indeed such a principle, especially in states. A state in which the better citizens triumph over the mob and the lower classes can truly be considered better than itself and deserving of praise when such a victory is achieved, or criticized in the opposite case.
Whether the better is ever truly defeated by the worse is a question that requires further discussion and can be left for now. However, I now understand what you mean when you say that citizens of the same race, living in the same cities, may unjustly conspire and, with their numerical superiority, overpower and enslave the few just individuals. When they succeed, the state can truly be called its own inferior and therefore bad, and when they are defeated, its own superior and therefore good.
Your statement, stranger, is paradoxical, and yet we cannot deny it.
Here is another scenario to consider. In a family, there may be several brothers who are the children of the same parents. It is very possible that many of them may be unjust, while the just ones are in the minority.
Very possible.
You and I should not argue about whether this family and household are rightly considered superior when they conquer and inferior when they are conquered. We are not discussing the proper or customary way of speaking, but rather the natural principles of right and wrong in laws.
What you say, stranger, is true.
This is quite excellent as far as we have gone.
Furthermore, could there not be a judge over these brothers we were discussing?
Certainly.
Now, which would be the better judge, one who eliminates the bad and appoints the good to govern themselves, or one who allows the good to govern while letting the bad live and voluntarily submit? Or a third option, a judge who, upon finding the family divided, does not destroy anyone but reconciles them to one another forever, gives them mutually observed laws, and is able to keep them as friends.
The last option would be by far the best kind of judge and legislator.
And yet, the aim of all the laws he gives would be the opposite of war.
Very true.
Would the one who establishes the state and orders the life of man have in mind external war, or that kind of internal war called civil war, which no one would want to occur in their own state if they could prevent it, and when it does occur, everyone would want to end it as soon as possible?
He would primarily have the latter in mind.
And would he prefer that this civil war be resolved by the destruction of one party and the victory of the other, or that peace and friendship be restored, and that, once reconciled, they focus on external enemies?
Everyone would desire the latter for their own state.
And would that also be the desire of the legislator?
Certainly.
And would not everyone always make laws for the sake of what is best?
Of course.
But war, whether external or civil, is not the best, and the need for either should be avoided. Peace with one another and goodwill are the best. The victory of the state over itself should not be seen as a truly good thing, but rather as a necessity. It would be like saying that the body is in the best state when sick and purged by medicine, forgetting that there is also a state of the body that requires no purging. Similarly, no one can be a true statesman, whether aiming for the happiness of the individual or the state, if they only or primarily focus on external warfare. A sound legislator will never order peace for the sake of war, but rather war for the sake of peace.
I suppose there is truth in your remark, stranger, and yet I would be mistaken if war were not the entire aim and purpose of our own institutions, as well as those of the Lacedaemonians.
I dare say, but there is no reason for us to quarrel with each other about your legislators. Instead, let us gently question them, since both we and they are equally serious. Please follow me and the argument closely. First, I will bring up Tertius, an Athenian by birth but also a Spartan citizen who was most enthusiastic about war. He says, "I sing not, I care not about any man, even if he were the richest of men and possessed every good," and then he lists them all, if he is not at all times a brave warrior. I imagine that you, too, must have heard his poems. Our Lacedaemonian friend has heard more than enough of them.
Very true.
And they have made their way from Lacedaemon to Crete.
Now, let us all ask this question of Tertius, O most divine poet. We will say to him, "The excellent praise you have bestowed on those who excel in war proves that you are wise and good." I believe that I, Megillus, and Cleinias of Knossos completely agree with you. However, we would like to be certain that we are speaking of the same men. Tell us, do you agree with us in thinking that there are two kinds of war, or what would you say? Even a far inferior man to Tertius would have no difficulty in truthfully replying that war is of two kinds, one universally known as civil war, which we just described as the worst of all wars, and the other, as we would all admit, in which we engage with other nations of a different race, is a much milder form of warfare.
Certainly, much milder.
Well, when you speak so highly of war, whom are you praising or blaming, and what kind of war are you referring to? I assume you mean foreign war, based on your statements about those who refuse to witness bloodshed and engage in combat with their enemies. So, let us say to Tertius, you praise those who excel in external and foreign war, and he must agree.
Clearly.
They are good, but we argue that there are even better individuals whose virtue is demonstrated in the greatest of all battles. We also have a poet, Theognis, a citizen of Megara in Sicily, who supports our claim. He says, "Cernus, he who is loyal in civil strife is worth his weight in gold and silver." We believe that such a person is far superior, as justice, temperance, and wisdom, when combined with courage, are better than courage alone. One cannot be loyal and virtuous in civil conflict without possessing all virtues. On the other hand, in the war that Tertius praises, many mercenaries will stand their ground and be ready to die, but they are insolent, unjust, violent, and foolish. You may wonder what my conclusion is and what I am trying to prove. I argue that the divine legislator of Crete, like any other respectable legislator, will always prioritize the greatest virtue when creating laws. According to Theognis, this virtue is loyalty in times of danger, which can truly be called perfect justice. On the other hand, the virtue that Tertius highly praises are good enough and was praised by the poet at the right time, but in terms of importance and dignity, it can only be considered fourth-rate, i.e., it ranks after justice, temperance, and wisdom.
Stranger, we are lowering the status of our inspired lawgiver to a level far beneath him.
No, we are not lowering him, but rather ourselves, if we think that Lycurgus and Minos established laws in Lacedaemon and Crete primarily for the purpose of war.
Then what should we say?
We should speak the truth and what justice demands of us, if I am not mistaken, when advocating for divine excellence. We should acknowledge that the legislator, when creating his laws, had in mind not just a part, and the least part, of virtue, but all virtue. He devised different sets of laws corresponding to different virtues. This is not how modern law inventors create classes of laws. They only propose laws when a need arises. One person may have a set of laws about property and inheritance, another about assault, and others about countless other matters. However, we argue that the correct way to examine laws is as we have just done. I admired the spirit of your explanation, for you were right in starting with virtue and stating that it was the legislator's goal. However, you went astray when you added that all his legislation only had a view towards a part, and the least part, of virtue. This is why I made my subsequent remarks. May I now explain how I would have preferred to hear your explanation?
Of course.
You should have said, "Stranger, the Cretan laws are rightfully famous among the Greeks because they achieve the purpose of laws, which is to make those who abide by them happy. These laws bestow every kind of good. Goods can be divided into two categories, human and divine. Human goods depend on divine goods, and a state that attains the greater also acquires the lesser. Without the greater, it has neither. The lesser goods include health, beauty, strength, including swiftness and physical agility, and wealth, not the blind god Plato, but a wise one, if accompanied by wisdom. Wisdom is the leader of the divine goods, followed by temperance. From the union of these two with courage, justice emerges. Courage ranks fourth in the hierarchy of virtues. All these virtues naturally take precedence over other goods, and this is the order in which the legislator must prioritize them. After that, he will establish his other laws for the citizens with these virtues in mind. The human goods should be aligned with the divine goods, and the divine goods should be aligned with their leader, the mind. Some of the laws will pertain to marriage contracts between citizens, as well as the procreation and education of children, both male and female. The duty of the lawgiver is to take care of the citizens at every stage of life, from youth to old age, and to administer punishments and rewards. In all their interactions, the lawgiver should consider their pains, pleasures, desires, and the intensity of their passions. He should monitor them and properly praise or blame them through the laws themselves. The lawgiver should also address anger, fear, and other disturbances of the soul that arise from misfortune, as well as the relief that prosperity brings. He should guide the citizens in their experiences of illness, war, poverty, and their opposites, determining and teaching what is good and bad in each situation. In addition, the legislator must be cautious about how the citizens earn and spend their money. They must pay attention to their agreements and the termination of those agreements, whether voluntary or involuntary. The legislator should examine how these matters are handled and determine where justice and injustice are present in their interactions. They should honor those who follow the law and impose penalties on those who do not, until the end of civil life is reached, and it is time to consider the proper funeral rites and honors for the deceased. The lawgiver, upon reviewing their work, will appoint guardians to oversee these matters. Some guardians will rely on intelligence, while others will rely on true opinion. The mind will unite all the legislator's ordinances and demonstrate their harmony with temperance and justice, rather than wealth or ambition. This is the approach I desired and still desire for you to take, stranger. I want to understand the nature of all these things and how they are arranged in the laws of Zeus and the Pythian Apollo, as given by Minos and Lycurgus. I want to know how the order of these laws is revealed to those who have experience in studying or practicing them, even though they may not be obvious to the rest of mankind like us.
How should we proceed, stranger?
I believe we should start again as we did before, and first examine the virtue of courage. Then we can move on to discuss other virtues, one by one, if you agree. This way, we will have a model of the whole and use these discussions to pass the time. Once we have covered all the virtues, we will show, with the help of God, that the institutions I mentioned earlier aim at virtue.
Very well. Shall we begin by critiquing this advocate of Zeus and the laws of Crete?
I will attempt to critique both you and me, as well as him, for this argument concerns us all. Tell me, were the Syssitia and the Gymnasia invented by your legislator primarily for the purpose of war?
Yes.
And what comes after that? What are the third and fourth? That is the kind of enumeration we should make for the remaining parts of virtue, regardless of what they are called, as long as the meaning is clear.
Then I, or any other Lacedaemonian, would say that hunting is third in order.
Let us see if we can determine the fourth and fifth.
I think I can go as far as the fourth, which is the frequent endurance of pain. Among us Spartans, this is demonstrated in certain hand-to-hand fights, as well as in stealing with the expectation of receiving a severe beating. There is also the so-called cryptia, or secret service, which requires incredible endurance. Our people wander throughout the country day and night, even in winter without shoes or beds, and they must take care of themselves. There are many similar practices, but to go into detail would be endless.
Excellent, O Lacedaemonian stranger. But how should we define courage? Should it only be seen as the ability to face fears and pains, or should it also include the ability to resist desires, pleasures, and flattery? These forces have such a strong influence that they can make even respectable citizens weak and easily swayed.
I would say the latter.
As you may recall, our friend from Gnosis spoke earlier about a man or a city being inferior to themselves. Isn't that right, Cleinias?
Yes.
Now, who is truly inferior, the person who is overcome by pleasure or the person who is overcome by pain?
I would say the person who is overcome by pleasure. People consider them to be inferior in a more disgraceful sense than those who are overcome by pain.
But surely the lawgivers of Crete and Lacedaemon did not create a courage that is one-sided, capable only of facing attacks from one direction but powerless against the insidious flattery that comes from another direction?
It should be able to face both, I would say.
Then let me ask again, what institutions do you have in your states that expose individuals to pleasures and do not avoid them, but instead place them during pleasures and compel or motivate them with the promise of reward to overcome them? Where can we find a law about pleasure like the one about pain in your laws? Tell me if there is anything of this nature among you. What is there that makes your citizens equally brave against pleasure and pain, enabling them to conquer what they should conquer and be superior to the most dangerous enemies who are closest to home?
Stranger, I could mention many laws that are directed against pain, but I do not know if I can point out any significant or obvious examples of similar institutions that deal with pleasure. However, there are some smaller provisions that I could mention.
I also cannot think of anything equally prominent in the Cretan laws.
It is no wonder, my dear friends. If, in our search for what is true and good, one of us needs to criticize the laws of the others, we must not take offense, but rather accept it kindly.
You are correct, Athenian stranger, and we will follow your advice.
At our age, Cleinias, there should be no feeling of annoyance.
Definitely not.
I will not currently determine whether someone who criticizes the Cretan or Lacedaemonian political systems is right or wrong. However, I believe that I can better than either of you tell you what the majority says about them. If you have good laws, one of the best laws will be the one that forbids young men from questioning whether the laws are right or wrong. Instead, they must all agree with one voice that the laws are good because they come from God. Anyone to whom says otherwise should not be listened. However, an old man who notices any flaws in your laws may share his observations with a ruler or someone of the same age when no young man is present.
Exactly, stranger. You seem to have understood the intention of the legislator, even though you were not present at the time. You are speaking the truth.
Since there are no young men present and the legislator has given old men the freedom to speak, there is no impropriety in discussing these matters now that we are alone.
True. Therefore, you may freely criticize our laws, for there is no shame in knowing what is wrong. Those who receive criticism with generosity and friendliness will benefit from it.
Very well. However, I will not speak against your laws until I have examined them to the best of my ability. Instead, I will raise doubts about them. You are the only people, whether Greek or barbarian, who were commanded by the legislator to avoid all great pleasures and amusements and never partake in them. On the other hand, regarding pains or fears, which we have just discussed, the legislator believed that those who had always avoided pain, fear, and sorrow from childhood would run away from those who were accustomed to them and become their subjects when they were forced to face them. The legislator should have considered that the same is true for pleasure. He should have realized that if our citizens are unfamiliar with the greatest pleasures from a young age and are not trained to refrain from all evil, the sweet feeling of pleasure will overpower them just as fear would overpower the former group. In a different, and even worse way, they will become slaves to those who can endure pleasures and have had the opportunity to enjoy them. These individuals are often the worst of mankind. Half of their souls will be enslaved, while the other half will be free. They will not truly be called men and freemen. Do you agree with what I am saying?
Upon first hearing, what you say seems to be true. However, it would be childish and simple to hastily conclude about such important matters.
Let us now consider the virtue that follows next in our discussion, which is temperance. What institutions do we find in Crete or Lacedaemon that differ from those of any ordinary state, like your military institutions?
That is not an easy question to answer. However, I would say that the common meals and gymnastic exercises have been excellently devised to promote both temperance and courage.
Stranger, There seems to be a difficulty with states in aligning words and facts so that there can be no dispute about them. Just as in the human body, a regimen that does good in one way can harm in another. It is difficult to say that one course of treatment is suitable for a particular constitution. The gymnasia and common meals do a lot of good, but they also contribute to civil unrest. This is evident in the case of the Milesian, Boeotian, and Thurian youth, among whom these institutions degrade the ancient and natural custom of love to a level below that of not only humans but also animals. This charge can be fairly brought against your cities above all others, and it is true for most other states that particularly emphasize gymnastics. Whether these matters are to be taken lightly or seriously, I believe that the pleasure that arises from the interaction between men and women is natural. However, the interaction between men and men, or women and women, goes against nature. This bold attempt was originally driven by uncontrolled lust. The Cretans are often accused of inventing the story of Ganymede and Zeus to justify their indulgence in unnatural pleasures, as they believe Zeus to be their lawgiver. Leaving aside the story, we can observe that speculations about laws revolve around pleasure and pain, both in states and individuals. These are two sources that nature provides, and those who draw from them in the right place, time, and amount is happy. This applies to both individuals and states. Those who indulge in them ignorantly and at the wrong time are the opposite of happy.
Stranger, I admit that your words are well spoken and I hardly know what to say in response to you. However, the Spartan lawgiver was right in forbidding pleasure. I will let my friend from Gnosis defend the laws of Crete. However, I believe that the laws of Sparta, particularly in relation to pleasure, are the best in the world. They have effectively eliminated the wild pleasure, excess, and foolishness that lead people astray. In Sparta, you will not find the revelries and various temptations of pleasure that are present in other cities and towns. If someone encounters a drunken and disorderly person, they will be severely punished, even during a Dionysiac festival. Although I have observed that this may happen during your performances on the cart, and I have seen the entire city of our Tarentine colonists drunk during a Dionysiac festival, it does not occur among us. Lacedaemonian stranger, these festivities are commendable when there is self-control, but they are senseless without regulations. To counter your argument, an Athenian only needs to point out the lack of restraint among your women. However, when faced with such accusations, whether against the Tarentines, us, or you, there is a common response that justifies the practices in question. When a stranger expresses astonishment at the uniqueness of what they see, a resident will naturally reply, "Do not wonder, stranger, this is our custom, and you likely have a different custom regarding the same things." We are discussing the merits and flaws of the lawmakers themselves, not men in general. Let us delve further into the topic of intoxication, which is a significant subject that requires careful consideration from the legislator. I am not referring to the act of drinking or not drinking wine at all, but rather intoxication. Should we follow the customs of the Scythians, Persians, Carthaginians, Celts, Iberians, and Thracians, all of whom are warlike nations? Or should we follow the customs of your countrymen who, as you claim, abstain entirely? The Scythians and Thracians, both men and women, drink unmixed wine, which they pour on their clothing, considering it a joyful and glorious tradition. The Persians, on the other hand, indulge in other forms of luxury that you reject, but they exhibit more moderation than the Thracians and Scythians. Oh, noble Megillus, if we were to take up arms, we could easily defeat all these nations.
No, my good friend, do not say that. There have been and always will be instances of victory and defeat that cannot be explained. Therefore, we cannot conclude that the goodness or badness of institutions is determined solely by the outcome of battles. When larger states conquer and subjugate smaller ones, such as the Syracusans did to the Locrians, who are considered the best governed people in their region, or when the Athenians did the same to the Scenes, and there are countless other examples, it is not relevant to the discussion. Instead, let us focus on evaluating each institution on its own merits and faults, without considering victories and defeats for now. Let us only determine whether a particular custom is honorable or not. First, allow me to explain how we should assess what is good and bad in relation to these matters.
What do you mean?
Those who are quick to praise or criticize any practice under discussion are approaching the matter incorrectly. Let me provide an example to illustrate my point. Suppose someone praises wheat as a good type of food, and immediately another person criticizes wheat without ever investigating its effects, uses, or the way it should be consumed, or to whom, with what, and in what condition it should be given. This is what we are doing in this discussion. As soon as the word intoxication is mentioned, one side is ready with praise, while the other side is ready with criticism. This is absurd. Each side presents their witnesses and supporters, and some of us believe that we speak with authority because we have many witnesses, while others believe that those who abstain are victorious in battle, which is also disputed among us. I cannot say that I will be satisfied if we continue discussing each of the remaining laws in the same manner. Regarding intoxication, I would like to approach the topic differently, which I believe is the correct way. If we are to use numbers as the criterion, there are countless nations ready to challenge your position, and you are only 2 cities.
I welcome any method of inquiry that is correct.
Let me present it this way. Suppose someone praises the act of keeping goats and considers them excellent animals to possess. Then, someone who has seen goats grazing without a goat herd in cultivated areas, causing damage, criticizes goats or any other animal that lacks a keeper or has a negligent one. Would there be any sense of fairness in such criticism?
Certainly not.
Does a captain only need nautical knowledge to be a good captain, regardless of whether they get seasick or not? What do you think?
A captain is not a good one if they have nautical skills but are prone to seasickness.
And what about the commander of an army? Will they be able to lead effectively solely based on their military expertise if they are a coward who becomes sick and overwhelmed with fear when danger arises?
That is impossible.
And what if, in addition to being a coward, he lacks skill?
He is a miserable person, unfit to be a commander of men but only of old women.
And what would you say about someone who criticizes or praises any kind of gathering that is naturally meant to have a leader and is well enough when under his guidance? The critic, however, has never seen the society coming together at an orderly feast under the control of a president, but always without a leader or with a bad one. When observers of this kind praise or criticize such gatherings, are we to assume that what they say has any value?
Certainly not if they have never seen or been present at such a gathering when properly organized.
Consider this. Can banquetiers and banquets be considered a type of gathering?
Of course.
And has anyone ever seen this kind of convivial gathering properly organized? Of course, both of you will answer that you have never seen them at all, because they are not customary or lawful in your country. But I have come across many of them in many different places, and I have also made inquiries about them wherever I went. Never did I see or hear of anything of the kind that was carried out completely correctly. In a few respects they might be right, but in general, they were completely wrong.
What do you mean, stranger, by this remark? Please explain. We, as you say, due to our lack of experience in such matters, might very likely not know, even if they came across our path, what was right or wrong in such societies.
That's quite possible. So let me try to be your instructor. Would you agree that in all gatherings of people of any kind, there should be a leader?
Certainly, I would.
And we were just saying that when men are at war, the leader should be a brave man?
We were.
The brave man is less likely than the coward to be disturbed by fears?
That is true.
And if there were a possibility of having a general of an army who was fearless and composed, should we not definitely appoint him?
Certainly.
Now, however, we are not talking about a general who is to command an army when enemy meets enemy in times of war, but one who is to regulate meetings of another kind, when friend meets friend in times of peace.
True.
And that kind of meeting, if attended with drunkenness, is likely to be unruly.
Certainly, the opposite of calm.
First and foremost, then, the revelers as well as the soldiers will require a leader?
Of course, no one more so.
And if possible, we should provide them with a calm leader?
Of course.
And he should be a person who understands society, for his duty is to preserve the friendly feelings that exist among the company at the time, and to strengthen them for the future through his management of the occasion.
Very true.
Must we not appoint a sober and wise person to be our master of the revels? For if the ruler of drinkers is himself young, drunk, and not very wise, he will only be saved from causing great harm by some stroke of luck.
It will indeed be a stroke of luck if he is saved.
Now suppose such associations are established in the best way possible in states, and someone criticizes the very fact of their existence. He may very well be right. But if he criticizes a practice that he only sees being mismanaged, he shows that he is not aware of the mismanagement, and not aware that everything done in this way will turn out to be wrong because it is done without the supervision of a sober leader. Don't you see that a drunken pilot or a drunken ruler of any kind will ruin a ship, chariot, army, or anything else under his direction?
The last remark is very true, stranger. I clearly see the advantage of an army having a good leader. He will bring victory in war to his followers, which is a great advantage, and the same goes for other things. But I do not see any similar advantage that individuals or states gain from the proper management of a feast. I want you to tell me what great good will be achieved if this drinking ordinance is duly established.
If you mean to ask what great good the state gains from the proper training of a single youth or a single chorus, then we cannot deny that the good is not very great in any instance. But if you ask what is the good of education in general, the answer is simple: education produces good men, and good men act nobly and conquer their enemies in battle because they are good. Education certainly brings victory, although victory sometimes leads to forgetfulness of education. Many have become arrogant due to victory in war, and this arrogance has caused countless evils. Many victories have been and will be self-destructive for the victors. But education is never self-destructive.
You seem to imply, my friend, that convivial gatherings, when properly organized, are an important part of education.
Certainly, I do.
And can you prove that what you have been saying is true?
To be certain about matters that have many opinions is a divine attribute not given to humans, stranger. But I would be happy to tell you what I think, especially since we are now about to discuss laws and constitutions.
Stranger, we are eager to hear your opinion on the questions being raised.
Very well, I will try to explain my meaning, and I hope you will understand me. But first, let me apologize. Athenians are known for being talkative, while Spartans are known for being concise, and the Cretans are known for their wit. I fear that I may appear to be extracting a lengthy discourse from very little material. Drinking may seem like a trivial matter, but it cannot be properly regulated without the principles of music. Music is essential for a clear and satisfactory treatment of the subject, and it is closely connected to education. There is much to be said about all of this. We should leave these matters for now and move on to another legal question.
Athenian stranger, let me inform you that our family is the proxenus of your state. From a young age, boys who are told that they are the proxeny of a particular state develop a fondness for their second country. This has certainly been my own experience. I can vividly recall how, when Lacedaemonians praised or criticized the Athenians, they would say to me, "See, Megillus, how your state has treated us, for better or worse. I have always defended you against detractors, and I have developed a strong attachment to you." I always enjoy hearing the Athenian language spoken. The saying that a good Athenian is exceptionally good is true, for he is genuinely good by the divine inspiration of his own nature and not manufactured. So please feel assured that I would like to hear whatever you have to say.
Yes, stranger. After you have heard me speak, please share your thoughts openly. Let me remind you of the connection between you and Crete. You may have heard the story of the prophet Epimenides, who was from my family. He came to Athens 10 years before the Persian War, following the oracle's response, and performed certain sacrifices as commanded by the god. At that time, the Athenians were afraid of the Persian invasion. Epimenides predicted that the Persians would not come for 10 years, and when they did come, they would leave without achieving their objectives and suffer more harm than they inflicted. It was during that time that my ancestors formed ties of hospitality with you. This is how ancient the friendship between my family and yours is.
You are ready to listen, and I am also ready to attempt an almost impossible task. At the beginning of our discussion, let me define the nature and power of education. This will guide our argument towards the god Dionysus.
Please proceed.
If I share my ideas about education, will you consider whether they satisfy you?
Let us hear them.
In my view, anyone who wants to excel at something must practice that thing from a young age, both in play and in seriousness, and its various aspects. For example, someone who wants to be a skilled builder should play at building children's houses. Someone who wants to be a good farmer should play tilling the ground. Those responsible for their education should provide them with toy tools when they are young. They should learn the knowledge they will later need for their craft. For example, a future carpenter should learn to measure or use a ruler in play. A future warrior should engage in activities like riding for amusement. The teacher should guide the children's inclinations and pleasures towards their ultimate goals in life. The most important part of education is proper training in the early years. The child's soul should be guided in play towards the love of excellence that they will strive for in adulthood. Do you agree with me so far?
Certainly.
Let us not leave the meaning of education ambiguous or undefined. When we praise or criticize someone's upbringing, we often call one person educated and another uneducated, even though the uneducated person may be well educated for a career as a retail trader or a ship captain, and so on. We are not referring to education in this narrower sense, but rather to the education in virtue from youth onwards that makes a person eagerly pursue the ideal perfection of citizenship and teaches them how to rule and obey rightly. This is the only education that, in our view, deserves the name. The other kind of training that aims at acquiring wealth, physical strength, or mere cleverness without intelligence and justice is mean and narrow-minded. It does not deserve to be called education at all. But let us not argue about a word if we agree on the proposition that those who are properly educated become good people. We must not underestimate education, which is the most valuable and beautiful thing that the best of people can possess. Although it can go astray, it is capable of being reformed. And the task of reforming oneself is the great responsibility of every person throughout their life.
That is very true, and we completely agree with you.
And we previously agreed that those who can govern themselves are good people, while those who cannot are bad.
You are right.
Now, let me try to further clarify the subject with an illustration.
Please continue.
Don't we consider ourselves to be individuals?
Yes, we do.
And each of us has two counselors within us, both foolish and antagonistic. We call one pleasure and the other pain.
Exactly.
There are also expectations about the future, which we refer to as hopes and fears. Fear arises when the expectation is of pain, and hope arises when the expectation is of pleasure. Furthermore, there is reflection on the good or evil of these expectations, and when the state embodies this reflection in a decree, it becomes law.
I am finding it difficult to follow you, but please continue as if I were understanding.
I am in the same situation.
Let us approach the matter like this. Can we not imagine that each of us living beings is a puppet of the gods, either their plaything or created with a purpose, although we cannot be certain which? However, we do know that these emotions within us are like cords and strings that pull us in different and opposite directions, towards opposite actions. This is where the difference between virtue and vice lies. According to the argument, there is one cord among these that every person should grasp and never let go, pulling against all the others. This cord is the sacred and golden cord of reason, which we call the common law of the state. There are other cords that are hard and made of iron, but this one is soft because it is made of gold. There are several other kinds of cords as well. We should always cooperate with the lead of the best, which is the law. Since reason is beautiful and gentle, and not violent, it needs ministers to help the golden principle overcome the other principles. In this way, the moral of the story about us being puppets will not be lost, and the meaning of the expression superior or inferior to a man's self will become clearer. The individual who achieves right reason in this matter of pulling the strings of the puppet should live according to its rule. Similarly, the city, receiving the same from a god or someone who has knowledge of these things, should embody it in a law to guide its dealings with itself and with other states. This way, virtue and vice will be more clearly distinguished by us. And once they are clearer, education and other institutions will also become clearer. This includes the question of convivial entertainment, which may seem trivial and unnecessarily lengthy.
However, the theme may turn out to be worthy of the length of the discourse.
Very well, let us continue with any inquiry that truly relates to our current objective.
Please proceed.
Suppose we give this puppet of ours a drink. What will be the effect on him?
What are you asking that for?
I do not have anything specific in mind yet, but I am asking in general, what sort of result is likely to follow when the puppet is given a drink? Let me explain my meaning more clearly. I am asking if the drinking of wine intensifies and increases pleasures, pains, passions, and desires.
Yes, it intensifies them.
And does it heighten and increase perception, memory, opinion, and prudence? Don't these qualities completely abandon a person when they become intoxicated?
Yes, they completely abandon them.
Doesn't the person return to the state of soul they were in when they were a young child?
Yes, they do.
At that time, they will have the least control over themselves, right?
The least.
And won't they be in a most miserable condition?
Most miserable.
So, not only does an old person become like a child again, but a drunkard does as well.
Well said, stranger.
Is there any argument that can prove to us that we should encourage the taste for drinking instead of doing everything we can to avoid it?
I suppose there is. You, at least, were just saying that you were ready to defend such a doctrine.
That's true, and I am still ready, especially since both of you have expressed your eagerness to hear me.
Indeed, we are, if only because of the strangeness of the paradox that claims a person should willingly plunge into utter degradation.
Are you referring to the soul?
Yes.
And what would you say about the body, my friend? Aren't you surprised when someone willingly brings upon them deformity, thinness, ugliness, and decrepitude?
Certainly.
Yet when a person willingly goes to a doctor's shop and takes medicine, don't they know that soon, and for many days afterwards, they will be in a bodily state that they would rather die than accept as the permanent condition of their life? And aren't those who train in gymnasiums initially reduced to a state of weakness?
Yes, all of that is well known.
And they willingly do so for the sake of the subsequent benefit, right?
That's correct.
And we can conceive this to be true in the same way for other practices, can't we?
Certainly.
And the same view can be taken of the activity of drinking wine, if we are correct in assuming that it has the same positive effect.
Certainly.
If such social gatherings were to have any advantage equal in importance to that of physical exercise, they would naturally be preferred over mere bodily activity, as they do not involve any pain.
True, but I doubt that we will be able to discover any such benefits from them.
That is exactly what we must try to demonstrate. Let me ask you a question. Do we not distinguish between two types of fear that are very different?
What are they?
There is the fear of anticipated harm.
Yes.
And there is the fear of a bad reputation. We are afraid of being perceived as evil because we do or say something dishonorable, which fear we and all people call shame.
Certainly.
These are the two fears, as I referred to them, one of which is the opposite of pain and other fears, and also the opposite of the greatest and most common pleasures.
Very true.
And doesn't the legislator and anyone who is of value hold this fear in the highest regard? This is what he calls reverence, and he considers the opposite, which is confidence, to be insolence, and he always views the latter as a great evil for both individuals and states.
True.
Doesn't this type of fear protect us in many important ways? What else ensures victory and safety in war? Because there are two things that lead to victory: confidence in the face of enemies, and fear of disgrace in front of friends.
That is correct.
So each of us should be fearless and fearful at the same time, and we have now determined why we should be either.
Certainly.
And when we want to make someone fearless, we in the law expose them to many fears.
Clearly.
And when we want to make them rightly fearful, mustn't we introduce them to shameless pleasures and train them to resist and overcome them? Or does this principle only apply to courage, and must someone who wants to be perfectly courageous fight against and conquer their own natural character, because if they are inexperienced and unpracticed in such battles, They will not be as strong as they could have been, and are we to assume that it is different with temperance, and that someone who has never fought against the shameless and unjust temptations of their desires and lusts, and conquered them in earnest and in play, through words, deeds, and actions, will still be perfectly temperate?
That is highly unlikely.
Imagine if a god had given a portion of fear to humans, and the more a person drank of it, the more they saw themselves as unfortunate with each sip, and they feared everything that happened or was about to happen to them, and eventually, even the bravest of men lost their composure for a while, only regaining their senses after the effects of the potion wore off through sleep.
But has such a potion, stranger, ever truly existed among humans?
No, but if it did, couldn't such a potion be useful to the legislator as a test of courage? Couldn't we go to him and say, "O legislator, whether you are legislating for the Cretans or any other state, wouldn't you like to have a way to measure the courage and cowardice of your citizens?"
I would be the answer of everyone.
And would you prefer a method that involves no risk or great danger?
Everyone would safely agree to that proposition.
And in order to use the potion, would you lead them through these imaginary terrors and test them when the emotion of fear was affecting them, and compel them to be fearless, encouraging and advising them, and also honoring them, but dishonoring anyone who refuses to be persuaded by you to be exactly as you command, and if they pass the test well and bravely, you would let them go unpunished, but if they fail, you would impose a punishment on them? Or would you refrain from using the potion altogether, even though you have no reason to refrain?
In that case, stranger, he would certainly use the potion.
This would be a method of testing and training that would be remarkably easy compared to the ones currently in use, and it could be applied to one person, a few people, or any number of people, and it would be wise for someone to only have the potion, rather than a number of other things, whether they prefer to be alone in solitude and confront their fears because they are ashamed to be seen by others until they are perfect, or they trust in the strength of their own nature and habits, and believe that they have already been sufficiently disciplined, so they have no hesitation in training themselves in the company of others and demonstrating their ability to overcome the irresistible effects of the potion, their virtue being such that they never engage in any great impropriety, but always remain true to themselves, and stop before reaching the last cup, fearing that they, like all other people, might be overcome by the potion.
Yes, stranger, in that last case as well, they could equally demonstrate their self-control.
Let us return to the lawgiver and say to him, "Well, lawgiver, there is certainly no such fear potion that humans have either received from the gods or discovered themselves, because magic has no place at our table. But is there any potion that could be used as a test for excessive and indiscreet boasting?"
I suppose he will say yes, referring to wine as such a potion.
Isn't the effect of wine the opposite of what we are looking for? When a person drinks wine, they become more pleased with themselves. The more they drink, the more they are filled with brave hopes and a conceit of their power. Eventually, their tongue becomes loose, and thinking themselves wise, they become full of lawlessness. They lose their fear and respect and are ready to do or say anything.
I believe everyone will agree with your description.
Certainly.
Now, let us remember that there are two things that should be cultivated in the soul. First, the greatest courage, and second, the greatest fear.
You said that fear is characteristic of reverence if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you for reminding me. But now, as the habit of courage and fearlessness is to be trained in the face of fears, let us consider whether the opposite quality should also be trained in the face of opposites.
That is the case.
There are times when we are naturally more brave and bold. On these occasions, we should train ourselves to be as free from impudence and shamelessness as possible. We should be afraid to say or do anything that is base.
True.
Aren't the moments when we are prone to be bold and shameless those when we are under the influence of anger, love, pride, ignorance, avarice, or cowardice? Or when wealth, beauty, strength, and the intoxicating effects of pleasure drive us mad? What is better suited than the festive use of wine to test and train a person's character, if used with caution? What is cheaper or more innocent? Consider which is the greater risk. Would you rather test a person with a morose and savage nature, the source of countless acts of injustice, by making deals with them at your own risk, or by having them as a companion at the festival of Dionysus? Or if you wanted to assess someone prone to love, would you entrust your wife, sons, or daughters to them, risking your dearest interests just to see the condition of their soul? I could mention countless cases where it would be advantageous to get to know someone's character in a playful manner, without paying a high price for the experience. And I do not believe that either a Cretan or anyone else would doubt that such a test is fair, safer, cheaper, and quicker than any other.
That is certainly true.
And this knowledge of the natures and habits of people's souls will be of great use in the art that manages them, which, if I am not mistaken, is politics.
Exactly.